Rabbi,
Guys,
good
good
morning. It's
morning.
so great. Rabbi, good morning. It's so great to see you.
Good morning. So excited to jump right back into Matthew on the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, let's get started. I think we're up to 7:13.
Yeah, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 7, verse 13. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. Do we stop
Okay,
there? Do
Isaac.
we
Isaac.
stop there? Yeah.
Yeah. We'll stop at 7:14. Yeah, we finish.
Um, okay, so let's once again. The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 7, verse 13 and 14.
There you go.
Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few.
Okay, so again, I know I keep pointing this out. One thing we should at least take note of is the possibility of a duplicate here as well. The second verse, for the gate is narrow and the road is hard, leads to life. We'll talk about it, how it's a little bit different than 13, but it does seem like this might be another example, maybe our third example that we've noted of things that seem to be duplicated, maybe not necessarily giving a deeper idea, but another formulation of the same idea, just as we said just right before Matthew 7, 9, and 7:10, which has the parallel in Luke 11, 11, 11, 12, where he has like 3 or 4 examples of very, very similar concepts. And as we know, as the gospel and the synoptics got written down, there's a time lag. And therefore, what that means is that there was a certain, what we call in Hebrew, Torah Sheba'al Peh. That means like how it was passed down tradition. And you try to be as close to verbatim what Jesus said or what the people heard, but this is kind of how the nature of the telephone game goes. But we're gonna just say that and throw that away and try to analyze them separately and try to give them a due respect. So I'll start with Isaac, ask you a very simple question. Gates, doors, entrances are phenomenal metaphors in religion, in Judaism, in literature. So tell me what a gate means to you.
That's a great question. That's a great question. So
That's
to
what I'm
your
here
point,
for. I'm here for the good questions.
before we get to that, what I want to ask you is, so as you noted, these verses they come across as being duplicative, and so we can set them aside. That's an observation.
I mean,
But
again, like
so
me, yeah.
so it's so broad, right? So the narrow gate, the wide gate, only few find it. You're speaking in very broad principles, and the way in again part of this could also construe to mean that given how this is laid out towards the end, is the way to explain, hey, what I've said so far is difficult, it may be hard to follow, um, but then that's just way of life, or because those who find the gate are very narrow, or is he trying to use a case of analogy to to make the case for to explain some of his previous verses, previous points where they were all very broad, they were all very broad principles, they weren't quite explicit. Again, it's broad generalizations, and this is just making like if you can't follow, that's because the only few will find it, and those who find it, it's really hard to follow.
So what you're saying is true. This is a conclusionary remark, it feels like.
Yeah,
This
correct.
is towards the end of the sermon, so it definitely feels that way. That being said, me taking a step back and say, if I had to give an estimation about the way that Jesus speaks, I would say it's broad. When, let's say, like even on the sermon, when we go to like 6:24, and it says, no one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate one or love. You cannot serve God and wealth. Like these are very broad principles. Like it's the legalism of Judaism, of Exodus, of Deuteronomy, doesn't really find its place in any way in the New Testament. Definitely not Matthew. I think this is much closer to some of the metaphors in Deuteronomy, where we see at the beginning and end of Deuteronomy there are some broad metaphors, and also obviously in the prophets in Jeremiah and Ezekiel there are broad metaphors. But I think the way Jesus writes, the way the New Testament is written, there's the narrative sections, but the non-narrative sections, the sermonic sections, definitely feel more that he's saying broad principles. Like again, like I think the way a sermon would be written today, when you hear a minister, he doesn't say, when you pick up the cup of water, make sure to raise it this way and drink it. He says, like, when you eat, eat with blessing, much more broad principles. So I think that's the first part of the answer. And gate is one of those metaphors. But secondly, when you look like as I mentioned in Deuteronomy, this kind of idea of I want to talk about gates more, but this idea of choosing kind of how to live your life and it being black and white does show up multiple times. There's a choice is either A or B. I'll just give you one example. In Deuteronomy, was it 30:19? It says in English, I call the heavens and the earth today to bear witness against you. I have placed life and death before you, A, blessing and curse, B, and you will choose life. You'll choose so that you will live. You and your offspring to love God, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So what that shows is that this binary option, which is not realistic, which is not the way that the world works. It's not usually like I'm going to go with Hitler, I'm going to go with the Allies. That's not usually the two options. The two options are like, oh my God, I am somewhere in the middle. And if I do this, those guys might kill me. If I do that, these guys might kill me. How can I choose the right option? So I feel like this binary option is something that is both abstract, impractical, but something that the Deuteronomy, the Bible does, something that Jesus does here. And it's interesting when you look at it as from a sermonic perspective, like what kind of reality is it superimposing upon the listeners? How is it like received to people to say A or B? Do people have a rejectionist attitude saying the world doesn't work that way? Or it might be the other side, inspirational. Listen, I know my life is gray. I know my life is not A or B, but I understand for that guy who's charismatic, that guy who's a leader, that guy who's enthusiastic, that guy who's able to give these speeches, he is able to frame it like it's this or that. And I want to be on that. I want to be out with the good guys. I want to choose life, as Deuteronomy would say. I want to choose blessing. So therefore, I have to reject not only the black, but I have to reject the gray, because the gray is really part of the black. There's no kind of evil in these kind of speeches. And I think these are just meant to be, from my perspective, it's heard when you hear from the right guy as inspirational. It's heard as that is for him black and white. I want a black and white world, even though it's not black and white.
So what you're saying is the way this verse, again, it's black and white in the sense that there's a narrow gate and then there's a wide gate. It's black and again, these are given as two opposite extremes. And life is not always the extremes, it's more the messy middle, trying to understand, how to do this or that. And so to your point, this verse could be inspirational for some to say that that I want to be in this pathway. But for some, it's also confusing, or it's not clarifying, because life is not always on these two extremes.
Right, and again, I pointed out Deuteronomy 30:19. I also have Jeremiah 21:8. And to this people you shall say, thus says the Lord, see, I am setting for you the way of life and the way of death. Again, I think that from a enthusiastic, from a charismatic leader, that's very meaningful. For me, it wouldn't be as strong. I'd say to my children, you could choose life and clean your room. Or you could choose death and not clean your room. It almost feels ironic, almost feels sardonic. It feels like I can't pull off that kind of binary philosophical option. It's just something that's noteworthy so, as like a prophet, like I said, Yirmiyahu and Deuteronomy do it, as this is the way that prophets speak.
So the black and white decide. What about a gate? Why not use a door?
Right.
Why not use a door, right? Because
right. So let's switch to the gate.
A doorpost is common within Judaism. What's symbolic? What's important? Why is gate used in this scenario?
Right. So we can't ask why the metaphor, but we could ask, let's understand the metaphor. Right. So let's go a little slowly. Enter through the narrow gate. So when we think of gates, I'd say there's three kinds of gates that would have been in the cultural context of Jesus. You have very famously first century temple gates. There were 7 or 8 entrances to the temple complex during Jesus' time. There's one main that the complex was like the whole big outer wall, big thing, but actual temple, there's one main gate. Like we'll actually talk about that, God willing, when we talk about sort of the healing that takes place as at the what we call the beautiful gate, or more likely the Nicanor gate. But those gates, there were wide gates and there were less wide gates. And once you get into the temple, it's like the least wide entrance. So definitely that, I think, religious metaphor would have existed just from seeing Jerusalem. So you have that. Number two, you have throughout the Bible, anyone who reads any part of Tanakh will see that not only are you supposed to put a mezuzah, your writings on your doorposts, on your lintel, but you'll see that the gate was the place that judgment took place. You'll see, like, if you have a situation where a person needs to be judged, like the story of Ruth, for example, when she has to go and find another suitor, and she goes to Ploni Almoni, that takes place at the Nicanor gate. Sorry, at the gate of the city. So gate of the city is also a metaphor for things that the place that judgment takes place. But practically over here, enter through the narrow gate, because it's not only narrow a gate, it's also narrow. We have this idea that the narrow gate implies many people can't come and go. When it's interesting, when you look at the synoptic parallel, people point out Luke 13, 23 and 24, which says someone asked him, Lord, will only a few be saved? He said to them, strive to enter through the narrow door. For many, I tell you, will try to enter, will not be able to. So this is actually, I think, one of the weakest parallels. It's very different, but people imagine this one as being parallel because it has the word narrow door. It has the word narrow, I guess. But number two, the concept is very same. Jesus is saying that not many people could go. So first of all, it's very interesting. I know we were talking about the golden mean yesterday. Did Jesus literally live up to the golden mean? Over here, is Jesus saying that human nature is such that many people can't pull off the kingdom of heaven? Just sucks. I mean, I want you to all be a Messiah with me. I want that. But it just, you're evil from your youth. You have different psychological corruptions that make it impossible. Sorry. That's one interpretation, that it's just impossible. Another one is saying the inspirational side, like, it's not that it's possible, is that unless you try really hard, you're not going to pull it off. So I'm not trying to make a negative point that it's a minimal amount of people going. I'm trying to make a maximal. If you want to be part of the people who come, try super hard. Strive, and if in Luke, you see this very clearly, where it says, strive to enter through the narrow door. For many, I tell you, will try to enter and will not be able to. So it's really about effort. But when you look at in Matthew, that message is not as clear. Where it says, enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction. So the psychological point is kind of made more clear here, that you can't really get there through the easy path. It is really working on your philosophy, your theology, yourself, whatever. And he pointed out there are many who take the road to destruction. It's a very, very strong path. And it's very interesting because a road is meant to get you to the point that you want to be. So this is actually like a stairway to heaven or stairway to hell, that you're on the road and it looks easy. The gate is wide, but you're going to die. It's cursed.
So when he says easy or hard or difficult, right? So is it based upon the previous verses when he said, "Ask and it shall be given"? As we said earlier, this is more of a conclusion verse. It concludes a passage, and the difficult or hard is that acknowledging that, hey, all the things I've said so far are very hard to do, or you have to put lots more effort to do all the things I've been saying before this. Or is it difficult, easy, hard, just based on something else? Or what qualifies this?
I mean, he does say things that are very difficult, right? When we look back at, let's say, Matthew 5:48, we say, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Like, okay, be perfect, got it. With the Luke parallel where it says, like, be merciful, like, okay, I could do that, but be perfect, it's a complicated thing. So I think over here the conclusion point is that everyone should strive for that Matthean 5:48, be perfect. But practically, you should realize that if you're just coasting in life, if you're just trying to do the easy path, it's not really going to work out for you. And again, I think 7:14 says something a little bit different. For the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life. There are few who find it. It even frames it from a finding perspective, that one, that like we thought people could see the narrow road and people could see the narrow gate, and people could see the wide gate or the wide road, and they could choose which one to go. Both are options. One is going to be very difficult for you to accomplish, but the narrow one, if you go, you'll accomplish. But then we see in 7:14, and there are few who even find that road. It's like you can't even see it if it's standing in front of you. Again, like we'll talk about our Jesus beer goggles. Like you need to have this different kind of vision in order to see it. It feels like.
Then in that case, it's not so much black and white, right? Because black and white is extremes because it's easy to follow. Then is he saying both? So in the second verse, because it's so difficult to see, is he pointing to this messy middle where you have to discern what is the right thing to do and what not to do, or how to behave, or what again, how to do or what not to do, and that's why very few find it. Well, it's very easy to be on the extremes or one or the other. But other way of saying this um, is 14 not so much a rephrasing of 13? Maybe 14 is a part rephrasing and a part acknowledgement that, yes, I'm giving you two extremes, but where you want to be is the middle to what you said earlier, because that's the part which is so difficult to see and to find and to even do that. I think being on the extremes is fairly easy to both identify and to know what needs. And somewhat easy. When I mean easy, when I mean in terms of discernment, it's or knowing what to do. Comparatively, it's easier than the one in the middle.
Yeah.
You're nodding. Are you? It's that. Tell me more. So, Rabbi, like, what do you think of that? Because I didn't until you highlighted this. I didn't quite notice. It says those who find it are few. What he's saying is even those who it's not just this way is narrow, but even folks won't even find this pathway. Only few will find this pathway.
Well, again, in Luke it says, I tell you, many will try to enter, will not be able to. You know, it's saying that like even people want to be on the narrow path, people who want to choose life will not be able to do that automatically. Again, like as this seems like a point where he's trying to say that this is a difficult thing to accomplish. You know, it's not. Maybe when you read the Golden Rule in 7:12, you'll be like, well, do to others as you want done yourself. That seems pretty easy. And he wants you to know, even that point, all these points to be perfect, to do everything on Sermon Mount. These are all a very difficult lifestyle, and it takes a lot of effort, which is, you know, an important point. Okay, I want to take a step back and do two things. I want to tell you one Talmudic text, which I think is very interesting and has a somewhat parallel. And then I never do this, but I want to tell you a Hasidic text. I think it'll help. So let's do the Talmudic text first. It's in the Babylonian Talmud, Chagigah 14b. It's a very famous story of the four sages who entered paradise. Paradise is just a Greek word. Pardes means paradise comes from the Greek word pardes, which means orchard. And an orchard just, you know, like an amazing environment. So paradise is one of those things that we generally view as like an elevated spiritual sense, probably the equivalent of entering the kingdom of heaven would be like the Christian equivalent. Anyways, so in English, the Talmud says the rabbis taught four sages entered the Pardes, this place. They were Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Kiva. Those are the four rabbis, or four first and second century rabbinic figures. So some probably all of them would have lived like a little bit after Jesus, but you know, close to contemporaries. Rabbi Kiva said prior to his ascension into Pardes, when you come to the place of pure marble stones, do not say water, water, for it said, he who speaks untruth shall not stand before my eyes. There's books written on that line. We don't have to go deep in it. AKA, Rabbi Kiva saying, there's some stuff happening here. It's hard to understand. Ben Azai gazed into probably at the divine presence over here, and he died. So first guy gives a warning. Second guy dies. Regarding him, the verse says, precious in the eyes of God and the death of his pious ones, the famous line from Psalm saying like, it's sad he died, but he had to die. Third guy, Ben Zoma, gazed into this Pardes and was warned, was harmed, meaning like he went crazy. So regarding him, the verse says, do you find honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be overfilled and vomit. That's a famous line from Proverbs 25:16. And that means like he kind of went past his intellectual or spiritual ken. He couldn't went too far. So first guy said, this is a scary place, warning. Second guy died. Third guy went crazy. And fourth guy, Acher, it says cut down the plantings, which means he became a heretic. He then rejected Judaism. And the story finishes, Rabbi Kiva entered and he left in peace. So what's interesting, well, this is not exactly a gate. It's definitely the same idea of like this doorway to this philosophical or spiritual place that they call Pardes. Jesus would probably call a kingdom of heaven. And he's saying that not only is it a narrow road, but it's a road that people can't, even once they get there, it's not even something they can emotionally handle. So this Talmudic story is a lot more extreme. He's not saying, the Talmud is not saying that people can't get there, saying that like you can't even handle it. So it's interesting. What I think when you do the comparison to what's happening in Matthew 7, 13, 14, the idea is that, at least what I think from Jesus saying, that you can, if you get there, if you find this narrow gate and this narrow path, and you work hard, you could do it. I think what's interesting, the Jewish perspective that we see in this Babylonian Talmudic text, is that even if you try really hard, even if you're one of the greatest rabbis of all time, which we generally view these four rabbis, these four rabbinic figures, as some of the great rabbinic figures of all time, they emotionally, spiritually, philosophically, theologically, for whatever reason, couldn't handle it, such that one died, one went crazy, one became not religious anymore. So I think it's really interesting to see, at least, that it's hard to get there. Many will try and will fail, but it's something that I think is doable in the Jewish perspective, where in the Jewish perspective, I think you see it's not even completely doable. Okay, so that's one point.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's a great contrast. So thank you. So would you say this fits with the broader theme of Matthew being subversive? You know, to your point.
This Talmud text is written probably this Talmud text is probably written a little bit after Matthew. Like it was written after Matthew was written. I don't think it's subversive or not in this one case. I think again this is conclusionary, and what he said here would not have been. I think this would have been. I don't know if the opposite of subversive is versive, but I think this would have been somewhat common. I think this is more just a warning, like saying that not everyone can access kingdom of heaven unless you put forth a lot of effort. And I think that encouraging motif is important for all religious leaders. And I think that is how we should view this, not as in anything subversive, but something that saying that you have to try hard. Okay, so that's a one text. The other one I want to do is from Rav Nachman. Every Jew knows the song, Gesher Tzarmod. There is a narrow bridge, and the only job in the world is to not fear. And I think every kind of person, like my kids know the song, that the whole world, the Hebrew is Kol Olam Kulo Gesher Tzarmod, Va'ikar Lo Tefachad Klal. So the whole world, the whole world is a narrow bridge, and the most important thing in the world, the principle is to not be scared. So I think also you could very easily contrast that Rav Nachman of Breslov phrase, saying that you should realize that this world that is it's a perilous path, and it's not obvious that you could go and not fall off the two sides. The narrow bridge is the one way to get to the place. You might feel scared, you might freeze up, you might feel you have to sit down, but you kind of have to keep going on that narrow bridge. So I think taking Rav Nachman on top of Matthew 7, 13, 14 really expands it. And the idea that this narrow bridge, or how it says in 7:13, this narrow gate and this road that it's not an easy road. And you might be scared, it might be something that you feel that you're going to fail. But the most important thing is to kind of stay on the narrow road. Don't be scared. Put your thoughts behind you, or your feelings of fear behind you, and just kind of keep on the path. So I think that also adds a little bit of context and help to this idea, this metaphor of narrow gates and roads.
So in a way, are you saying that? So is he saying that is he saying you have to go through the narrow path to enter the kingdom of heaven? Is that so?
Well, I'm adding the kingdom of heaven each time, because the verse Matthew 7:14 says the gate is narrow, the road is hard, and then few find it. So so I guess we could discuss. I just keep saying kingdom of heaven, but where's the gate going? I view the gate as just a metaphor of living a proper life, being on the road, living a proper life. I see no reason to do that. And even when you look at Luke, it goes a little bit farther. It says that only a few will be saved. So again, like this idea of salvation is usually equated with the kingdom of heaven, the idea of having this different perspective, being part of this messianic future.
So Rabbi, can I allow you to kind of contextualize this a bit, right? So these verses are 2,000 years old, much longer at that time frame. what would have been difficult then is not difficult now. Our perception of difficulty can evolve.
It's
Do you
all
see
difficult still, Isaac. It's all
it's
difficult. There's nothing easy in this world.
there's nothing is well
Nothing new under the sun, Isaac.
there's nothing new under the sun.
We're
That's what I'm
still
going to say
still
from
have
Delhi.
very similar challenges to what they had.
Yeah, um, well, we have challenges, but I wouldn't say, would you say we have similar challenges or just different challenges? And so
I
in
feel
that
like
case,
psychologically we have similar challenges. I mean, I don't know. You got to pay your bills. You got to feed your family. You gotta, get up every morning, overcome whatever nihilistic thoughts you have, and just kind of get on with your life. So yeah, I would say psychologically, definitely from an evolutionary perspective, yeah, it's the same kind of questions, and nothing new under the sun. Yeah, I would say it's very similar. And ought one live a good life? It's a good question, right? I mean, I think I told you a story once before, but I ran a class once, and it was this one specific class was on the pros and cons of lying, and obviously, to prevaricate, to lie, is something we want to, treat as anathema, treat as something that's not part of us. I asked the group of college students who thinks it's wrong to lie. Not one of them. I'm saying in a group of 20 males, not one of them thought lying was objectively wrong. Your goal when you speak is to manipulate, to coerce, to make sure the world serves your purposes. At least that's how they saw it. So I think that's I would call that a non-religious perspective. So from a religious perspective, there's like an objective ethical problem with lying. From a non-religious perspective, you kind of have to use your words to coerce. So I feel that question of lying, which like, it's invisible. It's not something that you could put a pen down on and say, oh, it's not the same thing as like something like stealing, where you're immediately just taking property. It's something that's more you have to hold yourself accountable for, more so than a lot of other kind of than murder, let's say. But not one person thought it was wrong. So I think that showed me that the not religious attitudes of the world were kind of somewhat the cultural norm in this group, and they couldn't even understand why lying would be bad. Like what's the problem? Lying, it's just your purpose. So I'd say those challenges of the first century are the challenges of the 21st century.
Yeah. May I push back on that? So lying, right, is both objective and wrong. So that should be the case of the black or white. You lie or don't lie. Lying is
Well, I mean, there's
bad.
white lies. There's some
So
gray
that's
there, but yeah.
so that's building on 30 and 40. It's a black and white, as in you lie or don't lie. And then we also discussed where there's a path in between, or it's the folks with everyday life. It's not always in the extremes. It's more as in what about this, what about that? How do you make sense of this? And so in that context, right, lying can be both as in another context of white lies, which most of us say all the time, or the half truth, not full
I
truth.
never say a white lie.
Yeah, and so in that sense, right, lying, or when I mean lying, not so much objective lying, but these half truths, or could they kind of mess again, they're in the messy middle. And so when kids were saying there's no objective lying, it's because we have a very high standard for the right way, and knowing that reality does not match that extreme, or the lived reality does not match that extreme, which in a way kind of goes back to kind of what we discussed, where one could present these two extremes, black or white. But you or I would say it's more the messy, it's more the middle path, or the discernment of whether it is. We take effort, and it's not always easy. It's difficult. It's vague. So in that sense, would you again, at least based on what I'm hearing you say, the college students' experience is more in line with this. They have such a
Well, I
high
was just
view.
making the note that the challenges of the first century have parallels in our century. I just saying you're saying like, is it so hard today, or is it less hard or more hard? I'm just saying that yeah, it's still difficult,
Or
and I
not
think
so
these
much
words
what's difficult, not so much what's less or more difficult, what's different, right? From the time these words were said, we say the gate is there on the way is far that leads to life.
I think it's all the
Has
same. Again, I just think like even the gate metaphor. In Judaism we have on Yom Kippur we have a prayer called Ne'ilah, which means the closing of the gates, and we use that metaphor about like now here's your last chance. And Maimonides talks about like going into the gate the courtyard of the king, getting through each gate. That, each century we even have the gate metaphor and the road metaphor. So I feel like these things resonate still.
Wonderful, Rabbi. Thank you. Maybe on that note, we should get.
Okay, go to work.
So the point you're making is, the gate is narrow, the way is hard, and it can both motivate a person to do the right thing or take effort to the right thing, but also takes effort to find the real path. Finding the path is not, again, only a few find the path. I don't think I don't think these verses articulate the signpost to the path. If finding the path is, if only if you find the path, are there any signposts on how to identify the path? I don't think that's been referenced so far.
I mean, maybe that's the rest of the sermon.
Okay, well,
those are the signposts.
Yeah. Well, Rabbi, on that note, so great to see you. Thank you, Study. Thank you.
Okay,
Have a great day. Thank you.